Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. I'll introduce everyone. Everyone can introduce themselves as we go around. My name is Brian Strong. I'm the member for Usk, and I'm chairman of this committee.
I'm Councillor Jim Higginson. I'm a member of the 7th Ward, Carrigort, and a member of this committee.
Joanne Chase, solicitor.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
David Jones, Head of Public Protection.
Lee Beach, Licensing Officer.
Councillor Jane Pratt, a member for Llanelli Hill and member of this committee.
Councillor Dave Evans for West End Ward in Caldicot and a member of this committee.
Richard Roden, member for Dixon with Osbaston, Monmouth, and member of this committee.
Councillor Reverend Malcolm Lane, member of this committee and member for the Mardy.
Councillor Jamie Trahan, member for Overmonnow and member of this committee.
Councillor Tony Easton, member for Dewstow and a member of this committee.
And one other member's just walked in. Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Morning everybody, I'm Anne Webb and I'm a member of this committee and I represent Hinton and St Albans. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies, Richard?
No apologies received, Chair.
Has Ruth sent her apologies?
She's apologised.
Councillor Ruth Edwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of interest.
As and when, Chair.
Right, item 3 on the agenda, which I think David Jones is going to lead on, is the Gambling Act 2005 premises licence fees. David.
Thank you, Chair. Linda would normally be here, but she's down with Welsh Government regarding the second item, so which Lee will cover the second report. In terms of the first report, yes, it's the Gambling Act. Members will be familiar with the format of this because it is an annual report and it's something that we must do under the Gambling Act 2005. So the purpose is to agree those fees for the coming year as from the 21st of May, which is as part of the Gambling Act. So it's recommended today that the fees and charges detailed in the Appendix A, which I'll go through with you shortly, be approved and have effect from the 21st of May of this year. And clearly they will subsequently be reviewed annually. So as I say, we do have a duty to set fees. Those licenses are reviewed and set annually on the 21st of each year. Premises licenses that the authority cover include betting shops, tracks, obviously got Chepstow Racecourse, adult gaming centres, something like Mega Services, family entertainment centres and bingo premises. The fee assessment has not been carried out for casinos, as members will recall. The full gambling policy went to council last October, and there's a resolution currently that we wouldn't permit a casino within the county. We haven't had an application, but it's there anyway, should that situation arise. 3.2 picks up the issue in terms of it's delegated to this committee, and again that's part of the Gambling Act statement of licensing policy approved last October. We do obviously we don't have the power to set fees for permits. That's not discretionary, and that's set by central government. So in terms of what we're looking at, in terms of what this would cover in terms of the fees, licence application fees, first annual fee, annual fees, change of circumstances as listed in 3.4, the different types, reinstatement, etc., provisional statements of applications. So we currently have 14 premises under the Gambling Act 2005. So that's 8 betting premises, the likes of your high street betting shops, 1 track betting, which I've just Chepstow, and we've got those adult gaming centres as well, 5 of those across the county. 3.5, European Services Directorate, statutory guidance, etc., determined that we must set a reasonable cost recovery. We can't go and obviously try and supplement our potholes, for example. It's got to be done on a cost recovery basis. So Linda particularly spends a lot of time to make sure that fee is appropriate for the amount of work that actually goes into covering that element of the work. So it is very much done on a cost recovery basis. And that's helpful. If we're ever challenged on how we come to our fees, then that is covered by how we actually set them. It's done quite prescribed way, so that's done as it should be done. Assessment cost, the maximum amount a local authority can be charged, is shown in Appendix B, which we'll get to. So sometimes our costs will actually exceed some of the maximum permitted amounts, which occurs in a few instances. So we try and obviously cover our costs as best we can, but we are limited by that factor that some have got a maximum allowable fee. So the reasons, obviously it is a legal duty, and it is, as I say, done on a cost recovery basis. So if we look quickly perhaps at Appendix A, that sets out the proposed fees for the coming year. So not a lot of variance from the previous year, but that's covered in Appendix B, so that's probably a bit more informative. So as I say, if you look down the columns, the first one's the maximum you can allow anyway. So it'd be, for example, the very first line, bingo premises, you can charge up to £3,500 per annum. Our fee calculation is 1,655, so as I say, Linda spent a lot of time going through that as to what the opposite costs are. So that's our proposed fee going forward from May for the coming year. So they will vary a bit as you look down that list. So an example of ones where we're not on full cost recovery would be the bingo premises licence. The maximum permitted fee there is £1,200. That's what we will proposing to charge as the maximum, because our own fee calculations suggest that is over £1,500 of cost to the authority. So there's a bit of a loss to that one. So that's why those fees are as described. So like I say, generally, if you look down the columns, not a lot of variation across from what we did from the year just been. So nothing that's too prohibitive for the trade, which is the other aspect we look at. So there's 2 pages of those in terms of renewals and variations are also listed in Appendix B. So hopefully, Chair, that's fairly self-explanatory. Like I say, I think members are used to the format, and the recommendations are as described in Section 2. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Evans. Richard Roden, please.
Thank you, Chair. As I felt that as nobody was going to ask a question, I should perhaps do so on behalf of the committee rather than move. I wish I'd waited a few seconds. Where you have some fees that lose money, is there any way to recalculate the way you do things, change the way you do things to actually reduce the loss? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the best way is probably trying to do it at a national level. So Linda and Lee and other colleagues will attend the Institute of Licensing. So certainly we can feed back. It would seem a bit in today's climate, it's not helpful to be at a loss situation in particular fees. So I think if the committee are anxious about that, Chair, what we can do is I'll report that back to Linda. She can flag that up then in terms of, if it's an issue for us, I'm sure it's an issue for other local authorities, and we can certainly feed that back.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, with that recommendation, are you happy that we approve these minutes? Okay, all in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Go on then to agenda item 4, which I think Lee Beach is going to lead us on. I think just we're concerned with part 2 of it.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the report that's been put forward is to do with the Welsh Assembly government consultation. So under the devolved powers of the Wales Act 2017, the Welsh Assembly government first put a consultation paper out, which we responded to back in September 2017. Then there was a bit of a stumbling block, if you like. There's changes to the Welsh Assembly government and the people that were dealing with it. So then in December 2018, we received our next consultation document, which we're looking at, and the comments must be submitted for that by the 29th of March this year. So the report then outlines parts of it. So if we go to point 3, so the devolved settlement basically allows the Welsh Assembly Government to create new legislation, licensing and enforcement for the taxi, and also they're looking now at the buses as well. So the consultation document has been received by us, and it's in a white paper format, which has been attached to the report as Appendix A, which I'll come to shortly. The key matters to that consultation document for us, it's been split into 2 parts. So there's the bus and transport side of it, and there's also the taxi licensing side of it. So when we've spoken with the Welsh Assembly Government, they've agreed, if you like, that we can give 2 separate responses. So one's through the licensing section, which deal with the taxis, and through yourselves, the Licensing and Regulatory Committee, and then also for our passenger transport unit, who deal with the bus side of it, and they will put their consultation back through Cabinet. So that's what we've advised Richard Cope and his team to do. So the consultation looks at national standards. So that would be for proposals to set national standards for all the taxis and private hire vehicles, and the how they're regulated, the operators, drivers and vehicle licensing. Enforcement to allow licensing authorities to take enforcement against any type of vehicle operating in its area. If there were national standards, that would be much easier to do, because at the moment, although we can check if a vehicle is licensed if it comes in from elsewhere, we don't know always what conditions that authority have, which would be different to ours. So we only do basic checks at the moment to check that it's road legal and that they are licensed. Information sharing, so they're looking at the national database, whereby we would then record everything with the vehicles, the drivers, and there's a proposal for a joint transport authority within the consultation. So that's a proposal. We have asked the Welsh Assembly Government, and they don't know really what it's going to look like. So that's why our responses in the consultation very much say, well, it could work, but we'd need more detail to give you a more informed answer on your proposal. So the draft response is part 2, which we're looking at, which is question 22 onwards. So the questions and answers that were put forward have also gone through the IOL, which Linda attends, the Welsh expert panel, which Linda is also a member of, and she's with them today again, looking at these proposals and consultations. So then, if I may, there's the resource implications. Linda's calculated that we currently have in Monmouthshire 251 drivers, 132 hat and carriage vehicles, 94 private hire vehicles and 33 operators. If there's a joint transport authority, and if all regulation is taken away from the local government and given to a new body, then that could potentially be a loss of 58,000 per year, which is detailed in the report. If I may just note, then we have a couple of amendments that we'd like to make. So since we issued the report, on question 29, we felt that we should add some more detail with regards to the enforcement side of it, to add that at the moment the police officers, DVSA officers and local authority officers all have different powers. So if there were proposals to make our enforcement powers more, I suppose, consistent and the same, that could benefit the trade. Because at the moment, if a police officer or myself stopped a licensed vehicle and there was something wrong with it, the penalties that they would get from a police or us are completely different, likewise with a DVSA officer as well. And it's not consistent then for the taxi driver on some occasions. Question 34, we have there mentioned question 33 above, and if you see on the third line, we've got as mentioned in option B, that should be option A, so that needs to be changed. And then finally on question 36, we're proposing with the Welsh with regards to Welsh language, we'd also like to add to that in Monmouthshire we've already got dual language badges, plates on all our vehicles, and we do have a bilingual roof light as well. So that's a requirement that we're already doing, so we're going to include that if you're all happy with those proposals. So if I may, I'd ask now for any comments on the consultation document or anything you'd like us to add.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you very much. And I have to say I was very disappointed with this white paper. I think it's very narrow in its approach, and it doesn't really encompass the changing, the fast changing of the apps and things that are happening out there. I totally agree with your comments. I couldn't support a national licensing authority. I think we know our nighttime economy, we know the personalities, we know the people in our area and the issues, and I totally agree with your comments on question 33. I'm concerned, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on what's happening, because, it's coming fast. In London, there was Uber. Now that's been replaced by Viavan. My daughter gets in a taxi, and that taxi is a pool taxi, and she'll use her phone app to go somewhere, and that taxi will stop en route and pick up other people who will join the taxi. And that actually then sets the price of the taxi. This is the future. And although it's not come to us yet, Viavan, which is a company which, I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but obviously they're supported by Mercedes-Benz. They also had, I think, $250 million of investment from Daimler. And this is the future. And I wonder, there's no mention in this white paper at all about the future of, how people are going to get about. And in a rural economy like mine in Llanelli Hill, where we're currently subsidising buses to the tune of 30,000 a year, and those buses aren't coming at the right times, and, people are then not able to get back from work in the morning because there isn't a bus till 9:30 if they work all night in the McDonald's as a shift manager. We need to have a much more flexible system. And I think taxis as we know them are going to change. And okay, it's in London at the moment, it's in Berlin, and it's in Amsterdam, this Viavan, but it is bound to, go across the country eventually. And I was very disappointed that this white paper doesn't touch on any of those issues, because obviously there's safeguarding issues there. If you've got people joining the taxi at various points, you could have issues there. But I mean, this is a fantastic way of sharing transport and reducing costs for people to get about. So I just feel that this white paper is out of date before it's even, it's not really up to date with, and it's not covering the subjects it should be. And I'd be interested to know how many of our taxi drivers are Welsh speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt.
I'll just cover the first aspect, and then I think Lee's got the detail in terms of obviously the future, I think, in terms of Uber counts, etc. I think you're absolutely right, and that was the issue really, was question 33, going back to your early comments. And that's so we came out and said we're not supporting that proposal because it's about knowing our localities. I know you've been out with Lee in terms of the betting shops. And it's similar, isn't it, that you want to connect obviously the license elements with the doing. So if you disconnect those two, it doesn't seem a progressive way forward. So and certainly what we'll do is, because Lee's gone through his representative on those groups, we'll feed that back in. It's gone to committee today. You're keen that we don't support that element, if that's the view of the committee, clearly. But yes, I think from an officer level, we made that point ourselves that unhelpful to obviously split off something that works very well. Actually, we had a WAO audit of safeguarding, and Linda and I were called in terms of the whole issue around taxi drivers. And the conversation is very much about, you know, the John Wall boys in London. What assurances do we have as an authority for rape and all the other things that could potentially go wrong, particularly with illegal cabs? So the conversation is very much about, you know, the here and now, what controls we got in the future. And I think, yes, I think we'd support your view that it seems to miss that element. It seems a bit more processy, shall we say, than the elements of the future and perhaps use of apps, etc., which is very much the way it's going to go. So yeah, so from what I'll do is I'll feed that back to Linda so you can feed that back to the national group. I'm sure Lee will have some comments on.
Yes, I agree. The legislation is obviously very old. It dates back to horse and carts, and it does need to be redone. It needs to be completely redone. That's what we feel. We do agree with you that this is a bit short. On the previous consultation, they asked about single tier. So you'd get rid of a Hackney carriage and a private hire, and you'd create something completely different, which is just a taxi, which everyone to the public knows it as. They don't know what a private hire or Hackney carriage is. Most people, they would just call them a taxi. And for us as enforcement officers, it's more difficult when you're looking at issues with them to differentiate or try and prove that one is a private hire or one is actually applying for hire, therefore he's a Hackney. It would be much simpler just to have one tier system, which this wouldn't provide by the looks, because obviously they're looking at larger vehicles as well, which is a different ball game altogether. Agree with your point that the times are changing faster with apps and things, and they need to concentrate more on the big regulators, if you like, and how the software companies are regulated more about their bookings and who they dispatch. And there's things in here like trackers and GPS, CCTV and things which could be included. The other point to make is that on a national level, not just in Wales, but the UK government have also released separate consultation papers looking at reforming taxis in England and Wales. So I don't know which one will come about first. I don't think anyone does at the moment, but we've got this consultation document, and that's why we're trying to ask them for a bit more, if you like, to get more information from them.
Just add to that, I mean, we do border 6 counties, so we've got, and it's very Welsh-centric, and we have made the point of what about, you know, it's got to run in tandem, isn't it, with the English version, because Chepstow and Monmouth are right on the border, so it doesn't really pick that up, as, which is disappointing. So we have referred to that in the, if you look through the consultation response, the issue that if you border 6, you know, it's fine having something that's consistent with the western side. So you've got Powys, Blanigwent, Torvine, Newport, to your west and north, and then obviously to your east you've got Forest Dean and Herefordshire. So if anything is going to happen, then fine to be consistent with the western side, but you know, what do we do about the eastern side as well? Because if you're going out in Chepstow, you're very well coming at us from Forest Dean and Bristol and other areas. So there are some merits there. We do like the bit about consistency. We have spent a lot of time, if you remember, in terms of age of vehicles, etc., so that would be helpful. The bit that needs a bit more work is this whole issue about, I think you're right, about looking forward as opposed to being a bit processy.
Make a brief comment. I totally agree, and I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we have a duty to try and get as many people using vehicles in the most economical way we can to reduce our carbon footprint and to make sure that people can get about as cheaply as they can. And I think we're really dragging our heels on this. I don't think Welsh Government are moving quickly enough with the times, and you know, we really need to start working on this so that we can help our communities who, you know, and to also invigorate our economy, because this is critical to all that happening.
And certainly that issue on the buses, I mean, as we say, there's 2 parts to this. So part one is the whole thing about public transport, which I think is your issue about subsidised buses. So we'll certainly feed that back to Richard. And I know that they've got to do something more formally through cabinet process. So there'll be another opportunity there to look at that. Yeah, but yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Councillor Higginson and then Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The point that I've already spoken to both David and Lee about this one, but it's specialist vehicles. We know that funeral cars, they got seat belts throughout, but then with these novelty vehicles, such as Buford, which is sports cars, being used for weddings in particular, I think, and they have to remove the passenger seat for anyone to get into the back seat, but the other side of that is they're only two-door. Now, any taxi, a taxi that is less than, you won't have a taxi license if it's less than 4 doors. But with these specialist vehicles, particularly the Bufords, and there are others, I have to say, which are used mainly for weddings and that, but sometimes they're used for other things as well. I have concern that, if it's a two-door vehicle, then there's a problem if something happens with people getting out. And that's what I'm in fact is supporting that there should be standards for these specialist type vehicles. And I just wonder how people down about 26, 30 mile away will consider that under those circumstances.
Yeah, so at the moment, funerals and wedding cars are exempt under the current acts. So if they were looking to regulate them as well, then perhaps there could be some regulation that could come out of the new consultation and any powers that the Welsh Assembly Government want to use with new legislation. But certainly, safety is, when we consider our taxi conditions of licence, safety is the prime element of why we do it all. So yeah, it's not a bad suggestion there.
Yeah, I think that's the positive thing, isn't it, to look for some consistency. And I think you are right, as that means members will recall lengthy discussions about the 6th and 7th seats within Ford Torinos, if you remember. So that came to committee a couple of times. So again, that would have been really helpful to have a consistent approach, wouldn't it, across Wales, to say this is what the gap would be. So if you're in that second row in the back of a vehicle, in terms of means of escape, the driver's knocked out, how do you get out of the vehicle? So that took a bit of to and fro, if you remember. So I think similarly, Chair, that would be helpful to have some consistency around those specialist vehicles. So I think that would be something positive that may come through the consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just a comment, an observation. We're looking at this from the perspective of licensing and the requirements of drivers under your control. But this white paper came out on the 10th of December, covering the whole of transport, the whole aspect of transport across Wales. And this particular paper will be discussed tomorrow morning at the Strategic Transport Group in a wider concept, which might answer some of the concerns that Councillor Pratt has made regarding how the system's all interlinked, particularly from the licensing perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Councillor Guppy. Oh,
sorry. Is it okay just to mention as well, you've just prompted me to mention that the consultation document, Welsh Assembly Government confirmed that they've sent it out to the majority of taxi firms that they were able to communicate with. We've also sent it to all of our licensed drivers, so they've all had the opportunity to respond as well. And we've explained to them the process, and that with taxis it's question 22 onwards, so they can focus on the bits that are relevant to them.
Councillor Guppy.
Improving the information sharing. I think, I agree with those points. And also on question 28, in view of enforcement, I think that enforcement should stay, as you stated in the statement, within the local authority. In view of timeliness, because what issues there are at local authority, they can be picked up quicker it can come direct to the authority opposed to going somewhere else, dealing with somebody else, then a response back. But also, with regard to safeguarding, some of the issues that you get, you can deal directly with the authority on safeguarding, which is not always easy if you're having to deal with another authority in view of who's speaking, you know, getting hold of the right person. And I think if you deal with those issues, and they have to be dealt with quickly, you'll have first-hand information, you'll have people that are used to dealing with you direct, because obviously you know, quite often, and I think quite regularly, deal with safeguarding and strategy meetings. And I think that that element would be taken away, and I think, you know, quite strongly that, you know, we're here, the part of the licensing objectives is safety, and if it goes out into the ether, that the speed, the timeliness of it could be really affected because of the conversations that you might have to have, you know, might be somebody North Wales, or, you know, we've got airports locally, Bristol and Cardiff, and if there's something happens in between, if you have to sort of deal with somebody from another part. So I strongly agree with that statement, and I think maybe something should be added in respect that actually it enhances the authorities dealing with it locally, the communication, and has good, you know, positive outcomes for the safety of the community.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, that's helpful, and we'll certainly add a bit of oomph to that if you like. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, knowing the locality is critical in this line of work. Lee, Sam, Taylor, Chris, Randy, I think you know all these guys. They're not based here, they're based in Chepstow and Abergavenny. So when Lee pops up for a sandwich, he's walking past the taxi rank outside Tesco's, Frogmore Street. And you'll have that dialogue with the drivers, and they're the first to tell you if they think something's amiss, or they've seen a driver on a Friday night. So there's that linkage with the trade, but also the linkage with the local police, the PCSOs, and that's something that happens daily. So as you say, I don't think there's no proposal to get enforcement centrally, but the licensing, as I said earlier, I think it's helpful always to connect the two up. And why, is there something wrong they need to fix? I don't think Welsh Government are completely clear on that. And obviously the next question is, do you think it's appropriate? Yes, no. We said no. Do you think it should stay as it is? Yes, we do. So I don't think there is any sort of hidden agenda here that's going to be whittled away. But the more comments we got to support that, keeping it the localities, I think is helpful, because, and we brought that through the WAO safeguarding audit as well, that clearly, if you know your localities, you've got officers based in the localities, that's when it works. Don't take things and put them in Cardiff, because you'll have a disconnect then. And you say that townly bit, as you mentioned, is absolutely critical. We'll know if something happened on a Saturday night, we'll respond ASAP. So the connection with the police is absolutely, because we're not 24/7 service. We do joint visits, but their intelligence and knowledge is imperative, and we work on that on an Abergavenny, Chepstow basis, and that's where most of the taxis are. So we do things geographically, and that works very well.
Sorry, if there was an issue in this area with a vulnerable adult or a vulnerable child, if that has to go to a central enforcement, then it would have to come back to Monmouthshire, because Monmouthshire's in charge of the vulnerable adults and vulnerable children, where it could go direct there, and it would make it safer. You know, you've got to move on these things quickly, and it would cut the red tape, because it's not always easy if you have to deal with another safeguarding authority. You may have not, you know, they don't know you, so they may not speak to you, so you may have to get somebody else to speak to you because they don't know you with safeguarding, and it's quite difficult. Our authority knows the people working in this authority, and that makes it safer.
Lee?
Yeah, I agree with that. So that at the moment we do, when we receive complaints on safeguarding issues or matters arise that we need to investigate, we discuss things with social services, the local police. We have strategy meetings to consider what action we're going to take if the driver needs to be considered, suspended, revoked, etc. To give you the opportunity to consider that, and we try and do that as swiftly as we can at the moment. So yeah, that's something that could potentially be a problem if there was a joint transport authority. We agree with that point. Looking at things like the DVSA, at the moment they do conduct operations where they check buses and lorries and things, but usually you see those on main roads or you know, A roads, motorways. It's very rare that you see them on smaller roads and in you know, rural areas such as Monmouthshire. We have had operations with them, but it's more, I suppose, reactive rather than proactive looking at things. At the moment, we've got a schedule with the passenger transport unit where we're going out to all our schools to check all our vehicles. And yeah, would that happen if there was a joint transport authority?
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, if just following on from Lee, if there is a problem, maybe a driver hasn't got the necessary paperwork up to date, or perhaps he's committed an offence. If it's a question of suspending or revoking his licence very quickly, the chair and the vice chair are asked to respond to the recommendation, and we can do that straight away, and then that action is taken immediately. So that is done, and it would make sense that that's retained within the authority. I'd like to commend the officers for all the work they put into this so far, and ask them to take into account what Councillor Pratt and Councillor Guppy and Councillor Higginson have said.
Sorry, Chair, did I get the response on how many Welsh speakers? Did I miss that? Out of the 251 that we've got,
Yeah,
do we know how many
at
Welsh
the moment,
speaking?
Yeah, I know that on our application forms for each driver licence, we ask them if they prefer to correspond with us in Welsh. And at the moment, we have no drivers that have preferred to correspond with us in Welsh rather than English at the moment.
And how many of those drivers are able to converse in Welsh if somebody, because they seem to make a big play of this in the white paper, don't they? It's one of they're saying about Welsh speaking, and you know, I think one of the questions was to do with Welsh speaking. So how many people request to be spoken to in Welsh? Do we know, over a year or?
Yeah, so at the moment we haven't got any that have requested to correspond with us in Welsh. We have that option, but none have taken it at the moment.
I thought that would be the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could take into account the concerns that have been expressed at this meeting, and could you convey to Linda our thanks for all that she's done as well, and we look forward to receiving an updated report later on. Okay. Thank you.
I'll just say thank you all for your input, and the points that you have made notes of, and we will look to include them. Thank you very much.
Chair, for clarity, if we can move the recommendations helpful, but just to draw members' attention to 3.5, in terms of those consultation responses we've gone through and members have considered, if we, what the proposal is to that response is submitted by Monmouthshire County Council replicates the response approved by the All Wales Licensing Expert Panel. I think it'd be helpful to say yes, we approve that with the addendum, if you like, of the member comments that have come in today. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Well, there are two recommendations. One recommendation is to approve the consultation response appendix A of the MCC in respect of part 2 of the white paper with the amendment as Thank you very much. Thank you both for your attendance this morning and clarifying so much for us. Right, we've got to confirm the some minutes now. First of all, the meeting held on the 15th of January here. All in favour? Thank you. 5B, licensing subcommittee held here on Tuesday the 15th.
Move it accepted, Chair.
Yeah, there are only three of us there. Thank you. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. And then 5C. 5C, a meeting on the 29th of January. There were 6 of us present, I think, then. All in favour of those minutes, please show. One thing I'd like to just add, on the last paragraph of that, we've got the last sentence. Upon taking into account the evidence presented, members unanimously agreed to approve the recommendations. And I'd like to add, and the Cabinet member for Operations Management be advised accordingly. You all happy with that addition? Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Come on to the next meeting, which is a subcommittee meeting on the 5th of March. I think the members have already been advised as who they are. And then the next licensing and full committee meeting here is on the 9th of April at 10 a.m. Thank you all very much for your attendance.